I was born in 1975 to a Methodist family. So I was born and raised in a Methodist family in the middle of Illinois, in kind of a more rural area. Okay, not in a big city, in a small city. And so we attended the church regularly every Wednesday and Sunday. We do newsletters, and we're a very integral part of definitely the church society and whatnot. So I always grew up going to Sunday school and learning about God and learning about the Gospels and the Bible and whatnot. And then came the time basically for confirmation. So when you affirm your belief in God and belief in the religion that you've chosen, being Methodist and whatnot. So in the process of taking these confirmation classes, basically I got into a discussion with a pastor about just exactly the belief system. That's what we believe. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't figurative. This is truly, truly what you believe, that Jesus is God. And the pastor, of course, said yes. So then I remember after that class, then going with my mother and father home in the car and saying exactly the same thing to them. And so my mother turns around in the car and says, yeah, of course we believe this. You know, this is what we've believed. This is what your grandmother believed and everything. What are you saying? And I'm like, well, I don't understand why Jesus, peace be upon him, would actually, you know, not say, I, Jesus, am God. And why does it have to be so abstract in the Bible? Why isn't there some exact phrase that just says, I, Jesus, am God, or some very clear way? And so from that point on, I always had some kind of doubt in my mind about, of course, Jesus being God, and I never really believed that Jesus was God. And so that was basically at the beginning of high school. So then after 4 years of high school and then 4 years of college, then I started to look or re-look and rethink religions through again. That was the only thing, no matter what, I kept looking at it again and again and again. And everything that I read in the Quran, I believed. And everything I'd read in the Bible, I had some kind of issues with. And so basically, I couldn't deny it anymore, and I decided to become Muslim. So when I first became Muslim, that was like, it has to be one of the happiest days of my life. Okay? In that moment, it was a great source of happiness. And here in the States, when you become Muslim, what seems to be the trend is that that person that wants to become Muslim will go to the masjid on Friday for Friday prayers, and will stand up in front of the entire congregation and will declare their shahada. So you have plenty of witnesses and whatnot for everything. And so, though it's not necessarily required, that seems to be what we do here in the U.S. And so that moment was just amazing. I was trembling. I can remember barely being able to say it. You know, it was a very emotional experience. Immediately after, you know, every single person in the masjid, there was like nobody that left that masjid, you know, probably 500 people. Everybody came up and hugged me, shook my hand, cried. It was just a really great time.
When Zaid first converted, my wife and I were both concerned about his religion.
When I told my mother and father the decision that I had made and that I'd actually done it, this was a major problem. And so there was a period of about 2 weeks where they just wouldn't speak to me. And literally it was said to me that you're thrown out of the family. It was a very, very difficult time in my life.
خلال عطلة الدراسة قرر زيد السفر إلى مصر لدراسة اللغة العربية والقرآن.
So looked all over the Middle East and whatnot and found a school in Egypt. And so went to a school in Egypt. It's called Markaz Fajr in Egypt. Excellent place. And I went there and I lived there for about a year. And so when I lived there, you know, I met all kinds of Muslims from all over the world, from Europe and, you know, Pakistan and India and whatnot.
Russia,
Bosnia, lots of Russians actually, and great people. Anyway, long story short, so I lived in Egypt there for a year, and I studied Arabic, and that's where I learned to speak Arabic.
في تلك الأثناء تعرف زيد وهبة في الجامعة في إلينوي.
My parents are originally from Egypt. They were born and raised there, and their ancestry is Egyptian. They immigrated to the United States about 37 years ago, and I was actually born in Tennessee, and then lived there till I was 12 years old. Then my mother, who is a civil engineer, got a job in Texas. So we relocated to Texas, and I went to school at a Catholic all-girls school. My parents really liked that because they said the nuns were going to keep me in line. And I eventually went to college, got my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and then went to the University of Illinois for my master's degree. I was working in a lab, and he used to come and borrow certain equipment from there. And he didn't actually know that I was Muslim because I wasn't outwardly Muslim. But at the time, he had started his faith journey and was studying Islam. And so when he found out I was Muslim, through conversation, he started asking me all these questions that I couldn't answer because I didn't know very much. So his questions pushed me to really go on my own faith journey and to say, okay, if I'm going to label myself a Muslim, then I better know what that means, and I better make sure that I have a conviction in that and choose it. So, you know, some people look at us and think, oh, did he become Muslim for you? And I actually tell people that he's the one that really pushed me to figure out what I believe. So it was very surprising and interesting to me, and very humbling to me, that this person who was, you know, born and raised in America and raised Christian was interested in the religion that I claimed. And that was another reason that kind of pushed me into starting to want to have answers, because if he actually knew more about Islam than me at that point.
بعد أن حصلت هبة على درجة الماجستير في الهندسة الميكانيكية، التحقت بالعمل في شركة خدمات نفطية في تكساس. كانت إحدى المهندسات القليلات.
So I was one of the few engineers working for this company, and unfortunately I was very sexualized and objectified in the workplace. And what I mean by that is men would tell sexual jokes around me. They would touch me in ways that were inappropriate. At the time I was not covering. And it was right before September 11th. I remember for a long time I was really struggling with my identity as a Muslim, because at this point I had started studying Islam more because of my interaction with the person who would become my husband and my interaction with different Muslims in graduate school. But at the same time I still was not confident enough or ready to put on the veil or to start to show an outward appearance of being a Muslim. Then September 11th happened, and I was at work at the time, and I remember my boss was saying to another person that I worked with, we need to just go over there and drop nuclear bombs on all of them. And he was clearly talking about the Muslims. And that was the first time I really started to feel like the other. But prior to that, I had never questioned being an American. I had never questioned my status in American society. But with that statement and with the events of 9/11, all of a sudden, I was the stranger. I was the other. I was almost, you know, the enemy in this country. And it really shook me. It shook me to really think about who I was and how I wanted to present myself in society. 5 days after September 11th, I put the scarf on in public for the first time. So I was still working. I would wear normal business clothes, pants and shirts and this kind of thing. But I would have a scarf on. And then about 6 months after that, when the rhetoric at work was very polarized and I was constantly having fights with my coworkers about being Muslim and about 9/11 and about, you know, their stereotypes of Muslims, and also just the whole sexualized nature of the environment, I decided that I didn't want to work there anymore. At the same time, I had also been studying and taking classes in Islam, and I would say that my faith really increased. So I quit 6 months after September 11th, and the day I quit, I started to cover fully in this way that you see me now. And this was about a year and a half before my husband and I eventually married.
The first time that I saw you, really what was going through my head was, you know, wow, is this really the same person? Has she changed? And, you know, from the person that I knew before, you know, from just, you know, even a little over a year before. And so that was something that went through my head. But then, of course, we had conversations, and it was clear that you still were of the same mindset and whatnot. So that was put to rest. But then also, too, I have to admit, the other thing that was going through my head at that moment was, wow, so really? I'm Muslim, and now I'm going to marry a true Muslim wife here. I'm
Like
getting
sealed the deal, huh?
full package, and, you know, and really, there's no hiding anymore when you go out, because, you know, now when we go out, it's like there's the Muslim couple.
But it was
So
strange for you initially to go out in public with me, right?
it was strange. I mean, I have to admit, you know, my appearance is that of still an American. Now I'm 100% of the time Muslim, and yes, you know, we're getting stares all the time, and I go out by myself, I don't get stared at nearly as much as I do with her. But I mean, the communities here are great, and because I think we try to be outgoing, we try to speak to the people, tell them about who we are. It's not just, you know, everything's Islam all the time. No, this is my daughter, this is my son, this is my wife, and we're a family. Then people can identify, and they feel more comfortable with us. And they're not going to forget us because of how we look, but then they'll remember our Islam and our character because of the people that we are and how we communicate with them.